According to Teach for America, generations of American students have grown up learning that American history myth about how Christopher Columbus discovered America, which every kindergartner once learned. But recent years, and especially in recent months, we've seen a demand for a more factual and diverse history teaching. While the current push is strong, to sustain it will require schools of education to prepare history teachers differently than many do now. However, long-term change depends on many parents and educators becoming allies in the push for this evolution, alongside Black, Native American, and people of color. Will social studies evolve through a combination of public pressure and more primary sources than were available to teachers previously? I'm Sarah Bernard. Today on The Issues, we'll focus on how history is being taught in the classroom. The topic is not as cut and dry as you might think. Our guest today will help shed some light on this issue, as well as some resolutions. That's all coming up on this episode of The Issues. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Today's panel will consist of representatives from 2 school districts who will discuss some of the issues as to how history is being taught in the classrooms. As happy as I am to be back in the studio and around people, due to COVID guidelines, we can only have 1 guest in the studio at a time per segment. So we'll be doing the issues a little differently today. But first, let's take a look at this video.
I'm Zach Gildrum. I teach at Jennings Senior High School. I teach the American government classes. And I've been teaching here for about 9 years. My style of teaching is really trying to encourage discussion, facilitate discussion, to help kids really kind of gather meaning through questioning. The questions that they have, some of the responses I can give can help build meaning, but then also the questions that I can pose back at them to try and help them think a little bit deeper about their own ideas and how does that relate to our content. They don't mention the word slavery in the Constitution until the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment, guys, is when they abolish slavery. They get rid of it. Before that, it was never mentioned. It's like they were hiding it. And so the Founding Fathers understood that what slavery really was on American politics was this big cancerous growth. And that this cancerous growth of slavery, if I try to remove it right at the founding, I'm going to bleed to death and die, and democracy dies with it again. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about, maybe 1500s, 1600s, all around the globe, and yet we still want it to be impactful to teenagers here in St. Louis in 2021. You can't start teaching history soon enough. If kids come with a greater foundation of the knowledge of history, then at the higher levels we can get much more into the inquiry of history. So less the what happened and more the why happened.
My name is Brian Keller. I'm the K-8 Science and Social Studies Curriculum Coordinator for Webster Grove School District. Typically in history, we've been teaching history from explaining and then exploring. And now we're asking teachers to flip that model and allow the children to explore, and then we do some explanation afterwards. This allows for different points of entry for our students to get into the work and see themselves within the work. From our students, we're just looking for them to have an open mindset, to be able to change their minds about some issues that we see within the classroom, and to have equity within our work, so every student can see themselves within the work that we're doing.
We don't want to waste any time, so we'll get right to it. I'd like to introduce my first guest, Dr. Paula Knight, who is the superintendent of the Jennings School District, and she will share her thoughts on the issue of teaching history in the classroom. And you're new to the Jennings School District, superintendent for just the past 3 months. So yes. Welcome to your new role, and here you are in the studio to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. When I received the invitation to come forward and talk about history and how we address history in the classroom, it's really important to me. Growing up in early childhood education, elementary, secondary, when we talk about history, history did not necessarily look like me. We started talking about slavery, we would talk about Dr. King, and that was it. And so now being the superintendent, who's ultimately responsible as the academic instructional leader in the district, really looking at how we are truly teaching history. What are the contents that we are teaching. What are the core tenets of history? Not just about slavery, but before slavery times. There's a lot to be proud of when it comes to our history as African Americans. And many of our young people need to know their history. History did not begin in Woolworth, sitting at the counter, trying to integrate at that time. It was long before that. And so ensuring that our children have that exposure to the various experiences that people who look like me and quite frankly, people who look like you experienced back then. It's brutal. It's brutal honesty, but it's important.
Yeah, and I remember from my high school years learning history, the best history I learned was through journals. So the textbook we had at the time had actual journals of people through the time periods, things that they wrote, and hearing their personal stories made history real for me. Is that still what you feel the students are looking for, and how far back does that go? So you talk about the Woolworth counter, but our history starts way, way, way before that, hundreds and hundreds of years before that, if you're talking about just America.
Absolutely. Right? And so, there are resources out here, and so we always try to get as many resources into the hands of our teachers, that's voice activated. And so, listening to Harriet Tubman, and, people don't know the story of the hush puppy. And so we all eat hush puppies, but we really don't know the historical background. Hush puppies came from, Harriet Tubman when she would throw them to the dogs as they were trying to make their escape. Those are the kinds of historical perspectives that many of our young people today, they don't have that appreciation. They don't know where it comes from.
Yeah. Do you find that the students are asking questions, or maybe asking more questions in your years of being in education? Has that changed, and how active the students are in the classroom when wanting to know more, or has it not changed?
Oh no, they're asking questions. They want to know more, and because they have what we call the Google, they're able to research things on their own. They ask more questions, and they want to learn more, and they want to do more research on their own. And so we allow them to have that student voice in the classroom to be able to guide their own instruction, and not necessarily leaning toward the teacher, really looking for teachers of history particularly to be facilitators, and not just the teacher who is just standing before kids and talking, but encouraging kids to go out here and do the research on their own.
So is that what makes for a good history teacher, the teacher that's really inspiring the kids?
Absolutely, absolutely, because that's how they learn. That's how they learn, that's how they grow, and that's how you continue to build that interest, because they've taken an interest. They want to know more about the walk across Selma. Who walked across Selma? Who was a part of that? We talk about getting in good trouble. What does that mean? And so now you see T-shirts that have let's get in good trouble. And so let's have more conversations. And so they're embracing this. They're embracing their history.
How is film used as a tool in the history classroom these days? Because there's so many great films out now, more and more, that tell the stories that you're talking about, and other stories. Is that a tool that's
It absolutely is. And what I have encouraged teachers to do over the years, and even in this current district, ask the kids, what do they want? Seek the buy-in from the young people, because we have one perspective, but as they're coming up in this day and age in 2021, what do they want to learn more about? And so it's very easy for us to talk about what we know, but when we get them out there and we encourage them, tell us what you want to learn more about. And we'd be amazed at what kids will tell us, because kids do have voice, and they have put some thought behind it. They watch TV, they're on the internet.
And do they think about their place in today's history and modern history, and their place now as they look back? Are they thinking about how they will influence the history that someday students will be hearing about and learning about?
Oh, sure. We talk about that as well. I meet with young people. I have a superintendent's student advisory council, and having conversations around, where do you see yourself in 10, 15 years? What's your legacy? What footprint are you going to leave when it comes to historical perspective, 30, 40, 50 years from now? What do you want people to know about you? And so, how do we continue to build on history so that history doesn't become stagnant over time, where we continue to build on it?
Right. So what about parents? How much influence do parents try to have, or do they have, with how history is taught in the classroom? Is that important?
It absolutely is, but I think it depends on the age group, you know, because parents, you know, they want to know, what is my child learning? And, you know, when we talk about history, we have to make sure it's age appropriate,
Right.
because, you know, history can be, the brutal facts can be just that, and some kids are just not quite ready for it.
Right.
And so we do have those conversations with parents. They want to know, they ask. When you talk about history, you know, Dr. Knight, what is my child going to learn as a second grader?
Right. Right, and history is starting young, it's starting in preschool. And are there things that parents can do to help at home, to help drive home the same kinds of messages and learning that they're going to get in the classroom? Do you have any suggestions?
Talk about the culture. You know, make sure they understand the culture. You know, what we have a tendency to misread on kids is that if they're young, they don't really know a whole lot. They're cute, but they're not really internalizing what they're experiencing every day. And so encouraging them to know their culture and know and understand, what does that mean? You know, we talk about hair. You know, hair dates all the way back to Madam C.J. Walker. And so, you know, valuing your hair, valuing the texture of your hair. And so we teach that early, especially to our young girls and to our young boys.
Absolutely. And so, and that's the students themselves, how much are they influencing change in the classroom through the books that are used or other medium?
Oh, they are, especially at the high school level. They have voice. Many of them have found their voice.
Yeah.
And as part of the Superintendent's Advisory Council, they want to share that. They want to share their thoughts. And we encourage that. Student voice is critically important. It's, you know, it's no longer the traditional way of teaching and learning, but ensuring that we are encouraging student voice.
Yeah, and students need to speak up.
Yes, they do.
I mean, I remember back in school when, you know, sometimes it's hard to raise your hand, but teachers want that.
Yes,
want
they
that
do.
engagement. Is there, what do you feel is the biggest issue right now in the teaching of history, just in general terms? Is there an issue, or are things okay?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is when we talk about censorship and making sure that we are not censoring voice, censoring content, but all content is worthy to be taught, but, you know, ensuring that it's being taught appropriately and appropriate with age. So I think that's a really big issue because, you know, we feel as though we don't really want to talk about slavery until kids are, you know, in middle and high school. But there's ways in which we can approach those subjects,
Right.
And really talk about what does, you know, the true meaning of slavery, what does that mean?
Right, right. So, and then what do you feel, is there any recommendation that you can provide to our viewers, who are parents, who are students themselves, who are other educators, to guide the conversation?
It's always important to seek voice. It's always important to seek the thoughts of others. Talk to the kids, ask them. You'd be amazed at what children will tell you. We have a tendency to underestimate the mind of a child, and until we stop doing that and ask them, what do you want to learn from history? What have you heard about it? So that we can continue to enhance that.
I love that, at the youngest ages. These
absolutely.
kids have so much to teach us.
Yes, they do.
And to listen to them and open up those conversations.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Knight, it's been such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
And best of luck to you in this
Thank you.
Academic year
Yes,
ahead.
thank
What
you
an
so much.
exciting first year for you at the Jennings School District. Next up, we have Dr. Glenn Barnes, who is in charge of the pre-K to 12, grade 12 social studies curriculum with the St. Louis Public Schools. And we are so excited to meet with him and talk to him about some of the same things that we've been talking to Dr. Knight about. So thanks for being with us, and please stay with us.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Cori Bush. COVID-19 vaccines are available to everyone 12 and over. The vaccines are safe, effective, free, and the best tool we have to beat the coronavirus. I encourage you to ask questions about the vaccines, just like you would for any other prescribed medication. I rolled up my sleeve and got vaccinated to protect myself and our community. Please do your research and roll up your sleeve. If you have questions, contact the City of St. Louis Department of Health at 314-657-1499.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund reading.
Why do you not get me?
I do. This is what it feels like for kids with learning and attention issues. Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
back. In case you're just joining us, today's topic is how to teach history in the classroom. We invited other school districts who were unavailable. However, we did receive a statement from the LEDUC School District, and I'm going to read it now. The LEDUC School District respects the uniqueness of each individual and embraces diverse backgrounds, values, and points of view to prepare our students for life in a multicultural society. The social studies curriculum is committed to culturally relevant pedagogy, which allows all of our students to see positive reflections of themselves in their communities. The K-12 program is crafted to foster critical and reflective thinking, make personal and civic decisions based on multiple perspectives, combat apathy, and encourage social responsibility. Our inclusive curriculum highlights communities and people who have traditionally been underrepresented and marginalized by history. LEDUC graduates enter to learn and emerge ready to go forth to share. So that was from the LEDUC School District, and I'd like to welcome our second guest today to the issues, Dr. Glenn Barnes, who is in charge of the pre-K to grade 12 social studies curriculum with the St. Louis Public Schools. Welcome, Dr. Barnes.
Thank you.
So glad you could be here today.
Glad to be here, thank you.
So today on the issues, as you know, we just had Dr. Paula Knight from the Jennings School District, and we've been talking about history and how it's taught to our students today, and has that evolved and changed over the years, and is it continually changing? So you've been in your role for over 2 decades.
I started as a teacher in St. Louis Public School in 1999, and then over the last 6 years I've been the curriculum specialist for social studies. And it has changed tremendously in that time frame. As I was saying to somebody this morning, history, it's not your mama's history class as we tend to think of it, of learning facts. But again, the focus today in our classrooms is driven by inquiry and asking big questions.
That's really interesting. So those of us who have not been in the classroom for a long time, like myself, and I was saying in the last segment, I remember my history class from high school and how great it was in that we got first sources of journals and things like that of people crossing the country and things like that, and it was very relevant to me. I could really understand it. How has the teaching changed? So how is it today? What's it like in the classroom?
The amount of primary source material is just overwhelming in a great way, in that now we have access to technology, we have documents at our fingertips. And so it's a blessing and a curse in that we have so much material to introduce to our students, to connect with them. I remember early in my career, we depended too much in some ways on a textbook and the resources that they provided. But as the digital divide shrank with the introduction of the internet and the availability of documents through the Library of Congress, for example, I was able to bring in other perspectives that textbooks just don't provide. And so it created a lot of conversation within the classroom of students wanting to know more of a particular area. And I know that Dr. Knight had mentioned subjects relating to hair and good trouble, to use the John Lewis phrase. As they learned more through these primary and even secondary sources, it encouraged them to ask more questions and engage further.
So you find the students are more interactive?
Absolutely.
And more interested, perhaps?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thinking about the statement that LEDUC made, that's what we want our students to be, is inquiry driven, asking more questions, not just settling for the information that is just spoon-fed to them, but really diving deeper, getting to the why of why things happened or why events took place, and even how it impacts our life today.
That's very interesting. So even in the teaching of, let's say, European history, same thing. Are students asking the whys? Are we teaching that? Or are you specifically talking about current American history?
No, we have the breadth and depth of history, and that's, again, I believe that a lot of folks think about their experience as a history student in high school or even prior to that, and there's so much depth there. And to a certain extent, we're also kind of confined by the state standards that are created at the state level to identify what students should know and be able to do.
Yeah.
And so there are some things that may be important to other people that sometimes aren't necessarily discussed, but the students will bring that in through their desire to know more. Or I've had students say to me, "Hey, how come we don't talk about this?" I said, "You're right. Why don't we talk about this?" And so getting into asking more questions.
So they bring that to you,
Yeah.
and then you listen to them and then might apply it to the curriculum.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you welcome that.
Bring that in, absolutely.
So let's talk about pre-K, because I know that's
Yep.
important to you. And it's not an age of student and child that we think about as needing to hear about history, perhaps, in the same way that we would when we're older. Dr. Knight talked about this and how important it is for the little ones they have inquiring minds. They're thinking, they're observing. So how do you apply history in what you're doing at curriculum planning?
History starts with helping a child know their place and know their role within society. And sometimes that starts within the home. It starts within the community. Knowing as they enter into this world what is around them and being aware of the people who make up their neighborhood, the businesses that are in their neighborhood, and the role that they play in being a citizen. That has always been a part of social studies education in this country, is the role of being a good citizen. And so for our really young students, it starts with the types of materials that we introduce to them, the stories, also engaging them in what they can do as, say, a 4- and 5-year-old to be a person who can contribute to society. One of the things that we do, I would even say in kindergarten, is students being able to talk about the rules that are on the playground and how those rules impact their friends and how they can engage with one another in the process of being a citizen within that particular situation. So that's one of the ways that we start with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what about parents? So are you actively engaged in your role with receiving parent input, and does that happen a lot?
It's not as much in my particular role right now. I would say it's more of the classroom teacher who receives most of the feedback in that realm. But yes, parents are delivering feedback and asking questions about what their children are learning and what courses are being offered in the schools. And then I receive that information, and we talk about how to address those issues.
So what about, you talked early on a few minutes ago about textbooks. And are textbooks still being used in the history classroom?
They're used as a resource, and that's the thing that I believe a lot of folks confuse as they see the textbook as a curriculum. The textbook is a resource in the same way that a resource might appear, say, from a website like the Library of Congress, where you're able to pull from that. The curriculum is largely driven by the school and the community in laying out what a student should know and be able to do.
Okay, so has that changed? Because I remember the textbook, and I remember the textbook as being, this is how we're going to follow the chapters, right?
Yep.
We're going to go under. So that doesn't happen anymore.
I don't want to say it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen as frequently as it once did.
So you're bringing in other resources and maybe jumping around a little bit more.
Right. It's presenting history in a more holistic manner. It's not relying on one source to be the determining source, if you will, or the determining factor as far as what is learned. But we're bringing in the sources that maybe aren't included: voices of women, voices of minorities, voices of indigenous people, voices that have largely been marginalized throughout the course of history. It's important to hear the voices of all people involved, as opposed to just the one single story that is told.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So what do you feel is some of the critical issues that you think our viewers would be interested in or should know about as it relates to education today and what we can do to help?
One of the things that I think is real critically important is making sure that social studies especially is not marginalized, in the sense that less and less time is devoted towards social studies at the elementary level than, say, some of the other subjects, namely math and English language arts. And so when we get to the end of the day, I hear so many teachers say, we don't have any time for social studies. And honestly, I would say one of the things that we need to do is lead with social studies, make sure that time is included in our day. And that's not an issue that is only St. Louis Public Schools, but it's across the nation because so much priority is being placed in English and math. But we tend to forget about, say, social studies and science.
And is that something that the average parent can help address, or is that something more for educators?
No, it's a shared responsibility. It's something that we can work together in bringing about that change. And if social studies education is a priority to parents, then that is a conversation that needs to be raised to the school to say, make this a priority, help us make it a priority.
Okay, and if you were to give advice to parents, and are you a parent yourself?
I am.
Okay, so advice to yourself as well. But you're an educator, so it's easier for you. But parents at home, what's the conversation? What should we be talking to our kids about at any age? And how much should social studies, history, culture, popular culture be a part of the conversation around the dinner table?
I would, again, going back to what Dr. Knight had said earlier, you have to make sure that the conversation is age appropriate. You don't want to make a conversation about difficult issues or controversial issues potentially cause trauma in a child to where the images that they're seeing on TV can be very detrimental to them.
Right.
And so we have to be very aware of our kids. We have to be very aware of the conversations that they're having, the interests that they have, and connect with them on those aspects first. I have a son who's a video gamer, and so going back and even discussing the history of video games, just so he has an understanding of how things have changed and evolved.
Right.
It helped make that conversation easier, but that was just one part of other conversations that could come forward.
Yeah, but that's great because we get tired of those video games, but bring it into the conversation and make it relevant and provide some context for it. I love that.
Yep.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Barnes. I really appreciate you being here today. We've heard some really great stuff today about the importance of history, how the teaching of history is changing in the classroom, and how we as parents and as members of the community can help our children, our students learn even more and in different ways. So I'd like to say thanks to each and every one of you as well who tune into the issues and who share your comments. And I just want to remind everyone that you too can join the discussion. Be sure to check us out online and on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to download the free STL TV app. Be sure to tune in next time when we discuss another gear grinding problem on the issues. See you next time on The Issues. Keep it right here on STL TV and experience St. Louis. Thank you.